So, last time we looked at a series of paintings by Taja, and this is actually a continuation of that whole series of living Thangka painters. Although Taja did die in the last 10 years, I consider him a contemporary because he was actually living until 10 years ago. And I showed you a painting by Glen Eddy, right? And let's see, and by Gega and by Sundu Zangpo. No, by Zinke. So we're going to continue our Living Thangka Painters series. And the first one is, this is a picture of Phuntsok Zangpo. And he is a master painter in the central Tibetan tradition, not the Eastern tradition that we were looking at. He's shown here in front of one of his paintings wearing a traditional Tibetan chuba, which is kind of a long-sleeved robe. And he was the painter for Dujim Rinpoche, who's head of the Nyingmas. He lives in Darjeeling. And this is one of a series of 3 paintings that I saw when I was there last time in 1981. And this is called a sertong in terms of its style. Serpo is gold. And you remember the black ones we saw last week we called nagtongs? So this is called a sertong because it comes from the word serpo, meaning gold, and thangka, meaning rolled up scroll painting. So sertong is a gold painting. Zunite. And there's also martongs, which are red, and they come from the word marpo. So this is actual really gold paint on the background of the canvas. And the deity is a feminine, wrathful deity in the Nyingma tradition. And you can see around the main figure lots of little lines. Can you see all those little drawings? Let's see if we can zero in. This is the top of the painting. The Buddha and some teachers in the Nyingma tradition are painted in this very fine, dark red or brown colored, maroon colored line. This is another painting by Phuntsok Zangpo. It's a mandala. And I think the deity is Vajradhara or Dorji Chung, but I can't quite see all the details in the center. It looks like Vajradhara. Now, one of his very best students is Sundu Zangpo, and he's the gentleman in the brown sweater in the center of the picture. Sundu lives in a little village called Rongbol, about 15 kilometers south of Darjeeling. And Sundu and his family, that's his uncle on the left and his mother on the left, his sister and his 2 brothers, his uncles and so forth all came there from Tibet in the 60s, and they built this little monastery, which you see right behind Sundu. And they were from an enormous Nyingma monastery in Tibet, and they brought all their huge symbols and horns and things. And when they have a puja, they invited me to one of their pujas. The drum almost filled up the whole room because it was designed for this great big, gompa of 2,000 to 3,000 people. And you can see right behind Sundu the little kind of gompa, which is the meditation place. Inside he had painted the walls with beautiful paintings of the Buddha and the Bodhisattvas, but the climate in Darjeeling is so tropical and so moist in the summertime when the monsoons come that all the paint just slid off the wall. They didn't use acrylic, they used kind of water-based paints. And after 2 or 3 years, all the pigments had just slid down the wall. So they had to repaint it. So this is the painting I have in the shrine room, Sundu's very first painting, which is Vajrasattva, or Dorji Semba. That's the Tibetan name for Vajrasattva. He's actually a Buddha in Bodhisattva's clothing. He's shown with the bell and Dorji, and his main attribute or function is purification. And his mantra, the 100-syllable mantra, is repeated over and over again in many, many different Tibetan sadhanas as a purification mantra. So this is Guru Rinpoche. We talked about him a little bit. Guru Rinpoche was the Indian teacher who was a Buddhist pandita. He was a wise scholar as well as a magician, sorcerer, and he was invited by the king of Tibet to help subdue the wrathful demons who were terrifying the natives, and he did. He came there and he taught widely and started building monasteries, and he brought all these wrathful deities into the Tibetan pantheon, so they became Buddhist. And a lot of the wrathful ones we see are local deities that he subdued and invited into the Buddhist community. So Padmasambhava is also shown in his 8 manifestations, and some of them, this is one of his manifestations, is Dorji Drolo, who's red and has flames riding on a tiger. We saw another Dorji Drolo last week, if you remember, by Singay. The tiger is strolling across a lake of blood, and he is one of the subjugators, and he's subjugating, or let's say that he helps you to subjugate your own negativities or neurotic tendencies. So with his dorje in the right hand and his purba, or his knife, in his left hand, one is cutting off ego, clinging, and attachment. So this is another painter who lives in Kathmandu. His name is Shedrup. He's the one on the left in the yellow sweater. The one in the jeans is a very high tulku who has taken up motorcycle riding. Young Tibetans are very attracted to Western stuff. And so he's also connected to the Dharma, but he's certainly having his motorcycle fling. And one of the other attendants on the right, Shedrup paints in the Karma Gadri style of Thangkas. This is his painting of white Tara. You can see the eyes on the palms of the Tara and extra eye in the forehead. White Tara has 7 eyes. In addition to the 2 regular eyes, there's a third one in their forehead, 1 on each hand and 1 on each foot. And this is a good example of the kind of Karma Gadri style, very light, transparent color, rather empty feeling. And Shedrup is a wonderful painter. He was living in Tenga Rinpoche's house. Do you know Tenga Rinpoche, Anila? Anyway, if you go to Kathmandu, you'll meet all these people. Here is Shedrup's painting of Milarepa. Milarepa in this painting was feeling very lonely and really missing his guru. He was feeling really kind of cut off. He was up in the mountains meditating, and this is in the first days of his practice of meditating in the mountains, and he was feeling really lonely and longing for Marpa, his teacher. And he had a vision, or maybe Marpa really did fly through the air on this snow lion on a cloud and visit him. So, but at least he had a very clear vision of Marpa flying through the air and coming to visit him. It's really delightful painting. And this is Shedrup's painting of the Naga king, the king of the Nagas. And the Nagas are the serpent people who live under the waters. And in the Eastern tradition, dragons and snakes are not evil beasts to be killed and cut up into trophies and so forth, but they are auspicious and good omens and helpful to people. Particularly the dragon is one of the emblems of the Emperor of China, and the dragons come from the heavens, and the sign of the dragon is a very good auspicious omen. Similarly, the snakes or the serpents, at the time of the Buddha's enlightenment, when the king of evil came to the Buddha and tried to distract him from his meditation, when he was sitting under the Bodhi tree, he brought temptations of all kinds, and he brought storms and bad weather, and the Nagas, the serpents, came and stood behind the Buddha and sheltered him with their hoods from the rain and the wind and the storm. And ever since then, the snakes have been very welcome parts of Buddhism. So you can see here the Naga king with the serpents kind of shielding his head, and the rest of his entourage playing around in the water. And the Buddha also left some of his most important teachings in the safekeeping of the Nagas. The teachings of Prajnaparamita, or the wisdom of emptiness teachings, were being guarded for several hundred years, according to the stories, by the Naga king under the waters. So here's another painter. This man, Kunchaladrepa, on the left, he was living in Sonada, where Kala Rinpoche lives. So when I was there in 1981, I was able to visit him. And he now lives in Kathmandu. It seems like a lot of painters have moved to Kathmandu. And Kunchaladrepa was at Rumtek Monastery and was a student of that old man we saw last time, Taja. So he is a practitioner in that same tradition as Taja and the Karmagadri style. And he was a monk when he was at Rumtek, but as you can see here, he's no longer a monk. He's married and has a family. This happens quite often. and as I say, he's now living in Kathmandu. I've kind of lost touch with him. But this is one of his paintings of Shakyamuni Buddha. And if we look at the clouds up at the top, no, that's coming next. This is a close-up of the bowl. You can see the detail in the robes, the shading, and the kind of fancy gold work, all the designs in the brocades. And up in the clouds you can see this little Buddha in the Dharmachakra mudra, teaching mudra. But what's really important here is the style of the clouds and the shading in the clouds. This is really Karmagadri style painting. And these little, I call them wimples, these little folds in the clouds only appear in Eastern Tibetan style paintings. They're different than the Central and Southern style paintings. So that's a real good earmark of whether it's Eastern or Southern or Central style. And the shading in the clouds is little tiny dots. It's not done with an airbrush, even though it looks like it. Little tiny dots to build up this beautiful transition from light to dark. So another painting by Shedrup. This is Vajrasattva, or Dorji Semba. And you can see the transparent quality of the outer nimbus around the body, how that halo is totally transparent. This is a good example of the vehicle of Vajrasattva is the elephant, so it appears here on the throne rather than the lion, which is really the vehicle of Shakyamuni Buddha. And above Vajrasattva is Kuntu Zangpo, who's a totally naked blue Buddha, and he's called the Adi, or primordial Buddha. And his symbolism is that of Dharmakaya, or Dharmadhatu, which means the sort of basic ground in which all phenomena arise and disappear. In other words, this is a strange concept, but we have this naked Buddha symbolizing almost nothing at all, a vast empty arena in which everything arises and disappears. All phenomena arise and disappear including time and space in this vast panorama of Dharmadhatu. It's one of those wonderful Buddhist concepts that we don't get right at first. I think that happens in a process of meditation, that one receives insight into this kind of realm. But anyway, this is a beautifully painted picture in the Karmagadri style.
The inner nimbus, is that again dots? The red?
Yeah. The halo around his head, yeah. Isn't that nice? Yeah. Yeah, it's really beautiful. And this is the painting that he was photographed in front of. He had done this painting as a request by Dingo Khyentse Rinpoche, who was one of the great Nyingma, but also Rime teachers. The word Rime means non-sectarian or ecumenical, sort of. And this is Padmasambhava's Copper Mountain Paradise. And I counted the figures in this painting. There were over 200 figures. The painting is not finished. He was still working on it. This is about the size of the painting, but it must have taken a couple of years to finally complete and do all the details and the figures. Beautifully, beautifully painted. So another painter. This scene is actually photographed at Rumtek Monastery in Sikkim, and we're looking across the valley towards Gangtok, which is the capital of Sikkim. Rumtek's about a 20-minute jeep ride from Gangtok. You can see those clouds, you know, that appear in the Tibetan paintings, kind of hanging in the valley up there. Anyway, on the left is Tinley, who is still a monk, believe it or not, and his brother Dawa. Dawa means moon, and since I met them, they both now live in Kathmandu as well. And Tinley is still painting. His brother's become quite a successful businessman. He deals in Tibetan art, and he also helps to sell his brother's paintings. So this is Tinley's painting of Vajradhara, or Dorji Chang, and this is the one I have hanging in the shrine room here. And it's from that lineage series that we looked at last week. That was actually, this is a copy of Taja's painting. It's the same drawing exactly. It's been traced and then painted slightly different colors than the one we looked at last week. And this is Tinley's Six-Arm Mahakala. It's a Nagtang, black background, gold lines. This is a very good example too of the kind of brocade mounting that most Tibetan Thangkas are completed with. Instead of being put behind glass and in frames, traditionally they're mounted in brocade, and then there's a dowel in the bottom end and you can roll them up. And the reason for this was it really was a Chinese design, but it adapted itself really well to the nomadic Tibetan tradition. And in the 16th, 17th century, before and after even, the big monasteries would not just stay in their home, they would go out like a great circus with their tents, and they would teach. They would travel from village to village, teaching, giving empowerments, and helping people. And for example, if the Karmapa were to go to China, it might take him 3 years to get to China, because they'd stop at every little village along the way and give the people what they wanted. And of course, this whole tradition has been pretty much stopped since the Chinese have invaded Tibet. But so that nomadic tradition of herding animals also was practiced by the monasteries, and going around the country into remote areas and giving people teachings. I just heard that the Dalai Lama, who was supposed to be in Sonada to give the enthronement to Kala Rinpoche's Tulku, the reincarnation of Kala Rinpoche, was supposed to be there last week, and because of some military situation in Delhi, they decided it wouldn't be wise for him to travel. He canceled 24 hours before this trip. But the people all the way from Darjeeling to Sonada, up and down the mountainside, had actually scrubbed the streets and put out decorations and prayer flags and banners, and you know, they had literally spent weeks cleaning up the place for the Dalai Lama to come. So this is one of Tinley's paintings at Milarepa, also from the Taja series that we looked at last week. It's slightly different from that series. There's slightly different figures other than the main figure, and it's interesting that they've chosen, in addition to the red and yellow, usually it's a blue brocade on the outside, and here we have green, and the green color is symbolic of Milarepa's period when he was fasting. The only thing he had to eat was nettles, and his body, they say, turned to kind of soft green, and green hairs grew on his body, and just because he drank this tea, and he was so damp that his whole appearance became green. So that's the reason for the brocade on the outside being green. So in this picture, there's a very famous painter. This is actually a picture of Kala Rinpoche, who's in the center. Kala Rinpoche is my guru. He died about 3 years ago. And this was when I first met him in 1972. Our paths crossed in Scotland. But it's the only picture I have of, oh dear, now I've lost his name. Anyway, it'll come to me. The gentleman in the yellow sweater, who lives in Scotland at Samuling. Sherab Pauldin is his name, Sherab Pauldin. And he's one of the great painters in the Karma Gadri tradition. And he's shown there with Kala Rinpoche's entourage. So this is Sherab Pauldin's painting. You can see that it has the same characteristics of kind of transparent quality. The Buddha is unusual because he's in a three-quarter posture. He's not straight forward or to the side, but this is also traditional in Tibetan art. Here's a good example of the unsymmetrical composition. Remember we talked about that a little bit? So the Buddha is not exactly in the center, he's off to the side. And you can see how your eye kind of comes in the bottom of the painting down here and goes up sort of in a diagonal like this, and then moves up around like this, and you sort of circle the deities in the sky and kind of wind up circling around the Buddha figure. In terms of the dynamics of the composition, it works differently than just a plain mandala. And again, the hieratic quality of all the disciples being smaller than the Buddha, which is very common in Christian art and other kinds of sacred art, where size and perspective are not there to be realistic. This is what's real here is the spiritual quality. So the Buddha, being more enlightened, gets to be bigger. It's quite interesting. So here's Sherab Pauldin's painting of the Karmapa. You can see the very transparent quality in the halo and so forth. Very lovely clouds and mountains in the distance. And he's got quite a series of protectors and yidams in the lower part of the painting. The Karmapa, by the way, is the head of the Kaju order, and he's always symbolized by his black crown. So when you see that black crown, you'll know it's one of the Karmapas. So, does anybody know who this is? Medicine Buddha. Yay! How do you know? So if he didn't have the plant and his hand were turned around the other direction, who would he be? Nope. Close. Nope. Akshobhya. He's the blue one. Akshobhya, yeah.
Who?
Akshobhya. He's one of the. We're just doing a little drill here for
Yeah, I got
for the
that.
Konashentis. All right. Akshobhya is one of the five.
Akshobhya?
Akshobhya. There's 5 Buddha families, and there's a different color for each one: blue, red, white, yellow, green. Is that 5? Red, yellow, blue, green, and white. Yeah. So Akshobhya is the blue one. Amitabha is the red one. Ratnasambhava is the Amoghasiddhi is the green one, and Bhairocana is the white one. And I'll be giving you handouts on all these different families, and you'll be able to see what their active attributes are, and what if you belong to that family, you'd also discover the negative side of that. So it's quite interesting. So here's Sherrod Paulden's painting of Marpa. Marpa usually has a crew cut, and here he does have a crew cut. He's Milarepa's teacher. There's Milarepa down here in the corner. Who would this be? Gampopa. Yay. How do you know it's Gampopa? Yeah, right. Good. So who's this up in the top? We had them last week. Vajradhara in the center. Tilopa with the fish, and Naropa with the skull. What is Vajradhara's Tibetan name? Joji Chan. Good. Okay. This particular canvas, Sherrod Paulden had 6 different paintings on it. Remember that one we saw last week where there were 2 paintings in the same canvas? Well, here he's got 6 paintings, and they're probably not much bigger than this, maybe even smaller, 8.5 by 11 or something. So again, who's this one up here? That's Medicine Buddha, and there's Shakyamuni Buddha, the historical Buddha. And this one is Padmasambhava. What's his other name? Guru Rinpoche. Good. And who's this 4-armed white person? No. Chenrezig. Yeah. Very similar to Prajnaparamita. Who is this? Vajrasattva, yeah. Vajrasattva. Do you know his Tibetan name? Dorji Semba. Dorji Semba. And who is this green woman I saw you with? Tara. Green Tara. Drolma. Okay. Good. Good. So here's another artist. He is a monk at Room Tech, and he's actually not a painter full-time. He's the one who did this little Milarepa that I have in the shrine room, which you've already seen. But it looks, this is bigger than the painting, really, and you can see it maybe even better, but it's quite transparent. It's very much in the Karmagadri style. It's a very nice little Milarepa.
I noticed that Marpa and Milarepa in some of these paintings have a red, I never
Halo?
noticed that before, a red halo. Is that...
There's no color significance. I think that I've been trying to figure out why the halos were different colors, and I don't see any correlation to any Buddha families. It just seems like intuitional judgment on the part of the artist. And hey, the painting needs some red, but maybe I'm wrong. I haven't discovered the key, but you might keep looking for it. Yeah, it's very lovely, isn't it? Transparent and kind of glacier-like mountains, and it's very beautifully painted for a small painting. And this painting, this painting is of Guru Rinpoche.
This is Central Nyingma.
Actually, it's actually Karmagadri too, but it's a little. There are some central influences in it. This is by actually he's now dead, but he was the leader of the Drukpa Kagyu lineage. His name is Kumtra Rinpoche, who was a great artist, sculptor, architect, and dancer, and he lived at Tashijong, not too far from the Dalai Lama. And there certainly are some stylistic influences from central Tibetan art in this, but basically he is a Eastern Tibetan style painter. Close-up of the face. You can see how similar this is to our Buddha face, except for the mustaches and the little bit of wrathful. It's the same ears. See how round the face is? It's just like our Buddha face, isn't it? Can you see the similarities? Eyes, nose, mouth.
Karma, Kagyu. What does karma and Kagyupa and karma?
Well, there are in the Kajupa lineage there are 9 sects and subsects, and the Karma Kamtsang, Karma Kagyu is one of the major sects of Kagyu. So you have the Drupa Kagyu, the Karma Kagyu. There's a whole bunch of them.
Okay.
So this is by another painter whose name is Tenzing. No, It'll come to me, some of these Tibetan names. Well, this Tibetan name is elapsed. But this painter was living in Tashijong. Tsering Wangchuk, there he is. My computer doesn't want to dredge up these names. Tsering Wangchuk, who paints in the Eastern style, Karma Gadri style. And I actually have two of his paintings in the... So, this is actually the first time I saw that tea stain color. Can you see that sort of ochreish color in the sky? And I realized that it was the basis for the whole painting. So that was the beginning of the tea stain, sort of, for me. It comes from the Chinese tradition of covering the canvas with a kind of a ochre tea color. And then all of the clouds and the white are done with white pigment. But you can feel that earthy kind of tea stain translucence in the grass and the hills, and it kind of permeates the whole thing, gives it a very wonderfully warm quality. So this particular deity is called Hevajra. He's one of the major yidams of the Sakya sect. He's also an important yidam in the Kagyu sect, but he's not quite as practiced as Shakrasamvara. But the Hevajra Tantra centers around this particular deity.
And the deity that's coming out of his head is...
Actually, those are one of his heads. So he's dark blue. He has a consort. You can't probably see her too well, but she's there. Her face is sort of reaching up towards his, and she's slightly lighter color. And he's holding skull cups. In the center of each skull cup is either a figure, a person, or an animal. So, another painter whose name is Ronge. This is Ngudrup Ronge, a Tibetan artist who was living in Vancouver, BC. He married a Canadian woman, and now they both live, I think, with Trungpa Rinpoche's community in Nova Scotia. And he passed through Boulder, and I got a chance to meet him and look at some of his work. His father was a great painter, and the Ronges were also teaching at Naropa in the mid-70s for a while. So this is his painting of a Mahasiddha. The word Mahasiddha means one of great miraculous powers. And if he has a bow and arrow like this, it means that his name is Saraha. Saraha was a hunter, and when we see this Mahasiddha with the bow and arrow, we know that it's Saraha.
What's the name of the center founded? Is that up in San Francisco?
Pardon?
I spent the last 2 years establishing a center called the Saraha
Oh, you
Center
did?
in San Francisco.
Oh, great. So Saraha is close to your heart. Yeah.
Very.
Well, that's great. So here is Nagarjuna. He's the one who went under the waters to get the Buddha's teachings of Prajnaparamita. And you can see the serpents behind Nagarjuna's head. Can you see them hanging out there? This is pretty much Karma Gadri style too. His compositions are a little different from most everybody else's, but they're... This is Ngudrup Ronge. And this is their father, Tenzing Ronge, who I think is even more Karma Gadri. It's a lighter, more transparent kind of color. So here's Milarepa kind of floating in this wonderful transparent field. And this is the only painting that we know that Trungpa Rinpoche ever did. It's Padmasambhava. It's quite small. I think the original is no larger than 9 by 12 inches. And I think he painted this when he was about 18 or 19, right after he'd come to England. I have a photograph of Trungpa Rinpoche actually painting this picture, a little black and white picture. But it's a lovely Padmasambhava, and it shows that Trungpa Rinpoche could, if he had wanted to, been an incredibly great Thangka artist if he had continued painting. But as far as I know, This is the only thing that remains of his work.
Mm.